The date is March 19th, 2025. Deep into this NHL season, the Montreal Canadiens are in a playoff spot. Yeah, that's right. This Montreal Canadiens team, with all the other competitors in that Eastern Conference wildcard race, find themselves right at the top. They put themselves in a position where we need to talk about them and the potential of them making this year's NHL playoffs. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through this entire Montreal team to see just how solid they've been so far and what their chances are of making the playoffs when it's all said and done. We're going to be finding out if this team is finally the team to get out of that rebuild completely and see if they're the team of destiny to get inside the playoffs. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through all of the Montreal talk and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey and Habs content just like this all throughout the year. Now, when we talk about this Montreal team, I think it's important to note that this Habs team has stuck around the race for pretty much the entire season. They got off to a little bit of a rough start and it was looking like the same old season from them. But especially you could look at the standings a couple months ago on January 15th, and they had a 21-18-4 record. They were right there with a team like the Ottawa Senators in that playoff race, and they weren't down and out by any means. They were still in the thick of it and getting better and better every single month, and we've seen that continue every single month, the improvements in this roster. And as you can see, we can go from January 15th to March 19th and look at the position the Montreal Canadiens are in. Currently with a 33-27-7 record, right there 1 point above everybody else in that wild card race with 73 points. That's fueled quite a bit as well by their recent last 10 games being 7-1-2, a 2-game winning streak, and especially against a pivotal rival there in the Ottawa Senators this year, they've been getting those big wins whenever they've needed them. But you also look at that wild card race and a little bit of this cushion the Montreal Canadiens have created for themselves, especially when you look at the games played, because you have a team like the Rangers who are closest to them in terms of actual point totals, but they have 2 more games played and 72 points. You look at other teams like the Islanders, the Blue Jackets, and even the Detroit Red Wings, and they have 3 less points in the same amount of games. So this Montreal team has created a little bit of a cushion for themselves, obviously not much, but late into the season, that does matter. Now, when we go through the likelihood of the Montreal Canadiens keeping this playoff spot and what it could look like in the future, you've got to look at the strength of schedule here for the remaining games, and it's pretty interesting and actually a pretty big advantage here for the Montreal Canadiens. At number 1 is the hardest, and then 32 is the easiest. You look at some of the teams that are competing with that final wildcard spot with Montreal, teams like the Detroit Red Wings who have the hardest remaining schedule in the league. You got a team like the Islanders right there as well, with also a pretty hard schedule. A team as well like the Columbus Blue Jackets, the New York Rangers. Those are all teams the Habs are fighting for, and they all have harder schedules than Montreal. Montreal down at number 19 is on the easier side of things. Really the only team in the race, I guess, that has an easier strength of schedule is the Boston Bruins, but come on. Are we serious? It's probably not going to happen. Even if the Bruins had the easiest schedule remaining, they'd probably find a way to fumble it. So not only do the Montreal Canadiens have a bit of a cushion here in terms of the points and the games play compared to their main competitors, they also have a big strength of schedule difference. And I think for Montreal, as long as they just continue to play the way they have and carry this momentum, don't change up anything going forward, this Montreal team, I think, has the inside track. They have the best odds to make the playoffs out of any of these bubble teams in the East, and that's extremely exciting to talk about. Because especially for a team like Montreal, it feels like they've been in this perennial rebuild for a long time now. You really have 2 different rebuilds, the one before the 2021 Cup final and then the one afterwards. A sustained amount of success really hasn't been brought to this Montreal team in basically a decade. And it's been a long time since this Montreal team has been a definitive playoff contender. I mean, Ben Sherratt was on the roster. That gives you a pretty good idea of it. The main thing I wanted to see out of this Montreal team this year was more competitiveness, be more respectable, make these games harder to play against, and see some pretty definitive improvements in the youth and the consistency there. And we have seen that so much and so often that they're in a playoff position now. I, in no world, really saw the Montreal Canadiens being in the spot they are now, let alone making the playoffs this year. But I think it's a testament to just how much this team has grown, and that is going to be so critical for the future. I think we underestimate in rebuilds, especially just how important getting some confidence and getting some winning going is, especially when you look to the future. You can't just flip the switch. You just can't rebuild for 5 years, be down to the dumpster, and then immediately be a Stanley Cup contender. You need to make incremental improvements, especially in the Eastern Conference, where every game is a bloodbath. And if we look at the Habs potentially making the playoffs, and if they were to make it, that type of experience for a lot of those younger players, I think is going to be so extremely important. I look at guys like Laine, Hutson, Juraj Slafkovsky especially, guys that haven't seen that type of intensity yet. I think that type of level is going to really bring out their games in the years to come. Of course, you have the runs that players like Caufield and Suzuki have been on, but that was so long ago and so early in their careers that I'm sure for them, they might have even forgotten the feeling of playoff hockey. Getting back into it with the improvements for this Montreal roster and also the young reinforcements still to come is going to be so critical, and to me would really jumpstart and really end the rebuild completely. I think no matter what for Montreal, they have proven that they are here to stay. They are going to be a competitive team, and not just a competitive team, a really good one in the future, winning against quality hockey teams, keeping games way closer than they would have in seasons past, especially at this time of the year. I just adore what this Montreal team is doing, how they've been able to gel at the perfect time, and I think that shows as well a lot of poise that will come in playoffs to come. And if it were to happen this year, a little bit of underratedness, and especially with the goaltending and how good Sam Montembeault has been recently, watch out. They're not an easy exit by any means if they were to make it, in my opinion. But you look all throughout the lineup and all the younger players, and pretty much every single young piece has had a part to play in this success for Montreal. We talked about Nick Suzuki yesterday in the underrated players video, and just continues to impress me in so many ways. That game-winning goal against Ottawa, just so clutch right at the perfect times. But he has seen massive improvements this year, on pace for 86 points this season. Unbelievable playmaking levels as well. He has been a true leader in every sense of the word, and continues to be, in my opinion, one of the best captains in the NHL. You got Cole Caufield, who has been fully healthy this season and still at the elite level that Cole Caufield always is at, on pace for 40 goals this year, 74 points, has really been able to improve that playmaking as well over the last couple of years, and that's allowed his offensive game to flourish. I just love that he's been a big part of this Habs team consistently this year, and him being healthy as well has just been a big element that Montreal really hasn't had consistently before. I also want to give a shout out to Juraj Slafkovsky, who always seems to have poor starts to this season and always gets to be labeled as a bust early on, but then of course by the time February comes over, he becomes a completely different player, and you can see now he's on pace for the same points as he had before. 50 points in 79 games, has been really good over the last month or so, and always at this point seems to gel with that top line again, which is great to see. Hopefully next year we can see Slafkovsky start a season in October instead, but a man can dream. But hey, if Slafkovsky is always better in the second half of the season, what's going to happen when he's in the playoffs consistently? I'm just putting that question out there for you to ponder. I also want to give a shout out as well to Patrik Laine, who I think has brought a mini Ovechkin element to this Montreal team. And obviously the power play goals are going to be a big part of it, as he has shown this year. 16 goals, 27 points in 37 games. When he has been healthy though, I think this Montreal team is just completely different. Obviously the power play goals are the power play goals, but an extra little bit of an element that brings is that for the opposing team, they don't want to take penalties. They don't want to put a player like Laine against them on the penalty kill. They don't want to have to give up those type of opportunities. So what's going to happen? They're going to play a little bit more clean. They're going to be playing a little bit less physical against Montreal. And that opens up more space for this Montreal team to play free, to play with even more space than they would have had before. Teams aren't going to be taking risks against Montreal now. And that to me, I think, is an element that doesn't get talked about as much. But you also have Jake Evans on the forward group, who has also been an extraordinary player this year, breaking out in a major way and becoming that's just unbelievable, true third line center of the future. You also have Laine Hutson, of course, who at this point I think is leading in the Calder Trophy race, and at this point, probably should be leading in the Calder Trophy race. Has just continued to be elite throughout pretty much this entire season. He was decent to start out the year in October, and since then, this has basically become his hockey team. There was a little bit of a slowdown before the Four Nations break, but he rested up completely and has been game-breaking since then. And you can see 53 points, 5 goals now in 67 games, on pace for 65 points this year. One of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen out of a defenseman, and I mean, in Laine Hutson's case at this point, I'm not even surprised anymore. But I also want to talk about Jaden Struble, who has been really good as well on Laine Hutson's pair, where the smart defenseman has continued to get better and better every single year. And of course, Sam Montembeault, who also has gotten better throughout the year. Started off a little bit shaky, but he has become one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. I'm going to go out and say it. The counting stats aren't great, but when you look at what Montembeault does on a day-to-day basis, the goals saved above expected. I think he's top 10 now in goals saved above expected, if not top 5 right now. And he just continues to get underrated because obviously the save percentages aren't great. The Montreal defense is kind of all over the place sometimes. Montembeault, though, continues to save games pretty much every single year. But the thing that gets me so excited for this Montreal team is the fact that they have already so many young, impactful pieces on the NHL roster, and I still think they have another half of this team that is yet to come. Of course, Ivan Demidov is the big one. Maybe could come onto the roster late this season if they were to make the playoffs, which would be... oh my God, I would do so much to see Ivan Demidov in the NHL this year, especially the playoffs. That would be unbelievable to see. But of course, he is going to be a dynamic force, and to me, is by far the Calder candidate frontrunner for next year. You have Michael Hage, of course, freshman of the year in the Big Ten in the NCAA this year. He's going to be awesome to watch. You got a player like Owen Beck doing so well in the AHL. Oliver Kapanen's doing his thing over in the SHL, by the way. Almost a point per game there as a 21-year-old. Pretty great statistics. You got a player like Philip Machar, who we'll see how he rounds out, but I think still could be a third liner. Then you got on the defense, David Reinbacher, Logan Mailloux, and on the goaltending side, my goodness, Sam Montembeault is already great, and the goaltending department has already gotten great results out of him. Imagine what they're going to get out of the skill set of Jacob Fowler, who continues to be elite. A .940 save percentage in the NCAA this year. Obviously, Boston College is a pretty good team, but Fowler is the main reason why he's been so good, and I think will be a great starter of the future. I also want to give a special shout out to Yevgeny Volokhin, who I think also continues to get a little bit underrated. A fifth rounder there back in 2023. He's been a starter in the KHL this year and has treaded water, which for a 19-year-old, I think is pretty good to see. Obviously, still a long road to go, a big project type, but I think Fowler and Volokhin, those are two great goaltenders, as well as Dobesh as well, that are going to make that Montreal tandem extremely interesting. I mean, the fact that you have Montembeault, Fowler, Volokhin, Dobesh, I mean, unbelievable type of talent there. But one of the biggest growths as well on the team is somebody that I also want to give a special shout to in Marty St. Louis, who has just continued to put this Montreal team better and better every single year and in better positions to win. I do think a lot of the roster is the biggest reason for it, and Sam Montembeault, I think, has saved a lot of the roster's defensive issues. But I think in Martin St. Louis' case, he's allowed really the biggest thing that I think has been so important for this team, the youth to completely flourish. He has put them in the best positions possible. You got a player like Laine Hutson, who, yes, at the start wasn't playing immediately on power play 1, but he didn't have his ego go out there and keep Mike Matheson out there for months and months on end. He eventually saw the truth in Laine Hutson and just how prolific he was as a power play creator, and was able to put him there eventually. And I think letting that youth truly thrive, go free, be in big positions to win. I think in St. Louis' case, he doesn't get the credit that he quite deserves. And if Montreal makes the playoffs, man, I mean, how could you not have him as at least a Jack Adams candidate, if not the winner? I don't think anybody predicted Montreal to be a playoff team this year. And I think in St. Louis' case, he's going to deserve a lot of that. And if the Habs are to make the playoffs, there's, of course, always the Jack Adams Award. It seems to always go to the team that's the most surprising. Well, I think Montreal would have to get that honor. Truly, though, the main thing I'm happy about for this Habs team is that they are competitive. The fact that it's March 19th right now, and I get to talk about them being in a playoff spot, the playoff race, and potentially making the playoffs this year, facing off against another surprising team in Washington. It's just so much fun, man. Especially early on in the season, it looked like it was again going to be Toronto, Florida, Tampa Bay, Boston in the playoffs. You know, it basically just rinse and repeat with the Atlantic Division from years and years in the past. But with Ottawa really rising up lately, with Montreal rising up, it seems like we are finally getting some change in the Eastern Conference playoffs, and I am 110% here for it. The fact that we're finally going to get some new matchups, some new rivalries going, that's what it's all about. If it does end up being Washington versus Montreal, I do see that series being a lot closer than some people expect. Both teams having magical runs this season. And I'm sure for Samuel Montembeault, he wouldn't mind recapturing some of that Yaroslav Halak magic if it were to happen. I'm obviously getting ahead of myself though, because there's still a lot more season left to play. And for Montreal, they have quite a few really important matchups here coming up. Even though their strength of the schedule does look better, they still play a few games versus teams they really do need to get some cushion on. Their next game is tomorrow versus the New York Islanders, and that is going to be a massive one, especially with how solid the Islanders have been as of late. They could be a team that could rival the Habs by the end, so definitely one to win there. But you also go down the list and you have big games late versus the Detroit Red Wings, versus the Ottawa Senators as well again, and then your last 3 games, you have the Leafs, the Blackhawks, and the Hurricanes. At least you would hope a Blackhawks win in there, but things could get really tense, especially if it comes down to the wire. You're facing a team like Carolina, who I think has won 7 straight up to this point. They're looking pretty good to end off this year. That could be a really difficult matchup. We'll just have to wait and see, especially if they were to win versus the Islanders, the Red Wings. That could really give the cushion that they need. Just winning against the right teams, It's something that Montreal has done all season, and as long as they continue to do that, they're in a playoff position. No matter what though, if the Canadiens were to go outside the playoff race, what they've accomplished up to this point has shocked the entire hockey world, and I am so here for it. And again, that's not even counting what they could do in the future once a player like Ivan Demidov comes in the fold. I haven't even talked about the potential power play where you could have Hutson, Demidov, Laine, Caufield on the same line, which would just be ridiculous, but I do need it in my life now. Now, before we go, I want to talk about today's sponsor in BetUS TV, the place to make your hockey picks all throughout the rest of this season. And it's interesting if you go over on the sites, right now Montreal is still at plus 220 to make the playoffs. So if you think the Montreal Canadiens are going to get there, those are pretty good odds right there. But a big thank you to BetUS TV for sponsoring today's video, and let's wrap things up, shall we? Man, I'd just be so happy if Montreal were to make this happen. I kind of need to make it happen, honestly. If it's Ottawa and Montreal in those final wildcard spots, I would be a pretty happy man. I just want to see new blood in the playoffs. That's pretty much it. And Montreal especially would be some pretty big new blood. So I want to know in the comments down below for you guys. Do you actually see Montreal making the playoffs? Do you think they're legit? Especially these final 15 games or so. Do you think they're actually going to make it? Do you see another team sneaking into that final wildcard spot? And I'd love to know as well, if they were to make the playoffs, how good do you see them doing? Do you see them putting up a fight versus a team like Washington as well? Let me know your thoughts down below. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell for more hockey breakdowns just like this all throughout the year. And of course, make sure you share with all the hockey fans you guys know online and click on this card for all of my training room content right in one playlist. Have a fantastic hockey day, y'all, and goodbye.